Good afternoon, everyone. We are in the Community Development Standing Committee of May 2nd, and Hafsqualam, Chris Kalakana, Klasquehomish, Oweomeo. Welcome to the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. There's an agenda in front of the committee. Looking for a motion to adopt it. Moved by Councillor Kent, second by Councillor Pryor. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Community Development Standing Committee meeting minutes of April 4th. Move that they be approved. Moved by Councillor Chappelle, seconded by Councillor Pryor. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Is there any business arising? Not seeing hands. First up is 4.1, a Squamish Oceanfront Phase Development Agreement memo.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Pryor?
I think I'm out on this one.
I think you are.
So, I'll be across the street in the park.
So what Councillor Pryor means by being out is that he is in conflict and he is recusing himself from the conversation. Let's translate. Hello?
It says it goes to 45. Oh, but you'll just be
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll be in my office.
Oh, in your office.
Is this the park? Okay.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to introduce Dave Mera, who is our Director of Major Projects. He's been with the district for quite a few months now, but it's his first appearance in a committee meeting. Dave,
Welcome.
committee.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have today a presentation, a fairly brief presentation on the summary that was provided in the agenda for the phase development agreement on the Squamish Oceanfront lands. So what we'll do is we'll touch base on some of the key items in the summary, and maybe we can open it up as a conversation. So if there's any questions at any point through the presentation, we can just address those then, and we'll keep moving. At high level, the sub-area plan, which is actually bigger in terms of the area coverage than the phase development agreement, envisions a total build-out of the area to a maximum population of 6,500 people. So that's approximately 2,600 dwelling units. We just took a wild guesstimate at, the build-out of this. If the build-out is to be in a 20-year period, let's say the residential units start being constructed in 2018, that would be approximately 140 units per year. The plan envisions 2,300 jobs. So if we take an average employment space per person calculation, then that leads us to approximately 690,000 square feet of employment space, and we just recently saw the development permit for the first, I believe 140 or so thousand square feet. I think it was around there. Some of the key aspects of the plan are the Oceanfront Park, of course, at the south end of the peninsula. Galbraith Park, which is located more centrally on the Mount Line Channel side, although it falls outside of the PDA area. The Village Commons, which is also envisioned to be located at the south end near the park, which is sort of a gathering place, and as well the Oceanfront Walkway, which circumnavigates the peninsula.
Yeah.
Just, the sub-area plan includes, I think, more than just the SODC land.
That's right.
But the phase development agreement just includes the SODC land.
That's right,
So
yes.
So those numbers are for the additional
It's
land
for the
as
whole
well.
area,
Yeah, thank
yes. And the largest portion of it is under the PDA.
And particularly the largest portion of the job creation is under the PDA area, not under the other.
Well, no, it's in the sub-area plan, that number. However, most of the employment space is in the PDA
That's what I was saying,
area.
yeah.
Yes. And I turn it over to Dave.
So, as far as the PDA goes, essentially the document locks in the zoning bylaw and the subdivision and development control bylaw for a period of 2 years. So if any changes are made subsequent to that on those documents, they won't apply, with some minor exceptions that Eunice will speak to later. And what that does is it gives the developer certainty to undertake a relatively large development, knowing that basically the rules are going to stay the same throughout the duration. The PDA also identifies a number of key amenities and timelines for the provision of those. But we'll get into that in a little more detail.
That's just an overview of the land use plan as contained in the sub-area plan as well as in the PDA. So that is essentially guiding the zoning for the area.
So jumping into the amenities, one of the key ones that is referenced in the document is the oceanfront park. And essentially the requirement to design and build and deliver the park is triggered by the first residential occupancy or the first tourism facility. And tourism facility is basically defined as some sort of a structure or place that is designed to attract visitors. Could include a museum, an art gallery, or a fountain display, something like that. It's defined within the PDA. Regarding the park, the PDA lists a number of components of the park that need to be included. Some of the key ones I've listed here include the oceanfront beach and a wind sports beach, meadow and dune grass area, pathways and boardwalk, as well as native shoreline planting, and intertidal habitat. PDA also sets requirements for community outreach and consultation during the design phase of the park. And basically, the minimum requirements set forth in the PDA are minimum 3-month duration of consultation, including with council and interested parties, wind sports, sailing organizations, as well as at least one public open house to solicit public comments. Can you go back? Some other requirements for the park. It requires both a motorized and non-motorized boating facilities, launches, areas to put in your boat, and associated infrastructure, washroom buildings, things like that. And as well, it specifies they have to be transferred to community groups, like the wind sports organizations. The park requirements, as you'll note on the plan, essentially the oceanfront park is to be built on what is now the ocean. So the requirements in the PDA are subject to approval from regulatory agencies, as well as from the district to authorize the placement of dredge soil from the Manicouagan Blind Channel to create the park. Another key amenity discussed in the PDA is the waterfront public walkway. PDA requires a developer to register a right-of-way or dedicate the walkway. And then some of the sort of more details of the walkway needs to be located roughly parallel to the ocean, located on top of or adjacent to the sea defense system. And it gives two locations in which it can be located on the land side of buildings, one being a sailing center and another being a marine transfer lift.
Going back, go back to the previous slide, please. For motorizing and non-motorized boating facilities. So I know there's a requirement for a sailing center, which is non-motorized. Is there an additional requirement for a public ramp for motorized boats, launching boats?
So it breaks out into two, and it defines it sort of loosely. One is to be sort of a put your kayak in, and another one I think might be considered a sailing center and a motorized facility together.
Oh, I don't think so. So the sailing center is not to replace the public boat launch that we now have in the district, because that's an issue community-wide, and there's possibly other locations for it. I wasn't aware of the requirement to have it on the oceanfront. I stand to be corrected, I haven't read the whole PDA, but the part that I have looked at is with respect to the sailing center. And the sailing center will not replace what is present with the boat launch ramp. It's quite a different function. So in the committee that I'm on, a little committee that's sort of steering some of the planning of that, it's not intended at all to replace that. It's more like the Jericho Sailing Center, smaller scale, it's more like that.
Yeah, and I can clarify that the text may be slightly wrong. So design and construct at least 2 areas for launching non-motorized boats,
Right.
and then design and construct the sailing
The other
center.
one is the wind sports, I think, for the windsurfers and kiteboarders. That's the second one. Thank you.
Thank you for
So
pointing
not,
that out.
not motorized necessarily.
Correct.
Okay.
Some other requirements for the waterfront walkway, just kind of minor technical things. The location, as originally highlighted there, it can be adjusted to consider engineering issues, floodproofing, geotechnical remediation considerations. The path itself, there's a 3.5 meter public access area and then a 3 meter wide travel path is specified. And then each section of walkway is required to be complete prior to occupancy of the first building on each subdivided lot. So it'll be constructed as development moves along the shoreline. In addition, there is some small wording towards public art contributions. Basically identifies that 3 installations are required, worth $50,000 each for a total contribution of $150,000. And the oceanfront park includes the requirement to design and erect a Land's End monument at the very southern portion of the park.
So that's just an overview of Schedule H, which is also included in the phase development agreement, comes out of the sub-area plan. And that identifies the locations for parks. So you see the two green circles, one being here and one being here. These are supposed to be open spaces accessible to the public outside of the park dedication that is on the ocean. Again, the PDA does not cover this site, so that's something that is in direction for the future. And then the red circles identify civic facilities. This here identifies a number of potential possibilities that could go in there, such as a theater or a municipal hall, includes that as well. This is the Land's End monument, and then we've got the oceanfront walkway going around the site. It also includes pedestrian views here, so you see the green connections throughout the site.
PDA spells out a few shoreline and flood construction level considerations, as I think have come up recently with the recent development permit. One is that the developer shall consider Green Shores principles along Catamount Slough and also in respect to other shores, and it does recognize that harder edges are more appropriate along the Mancran Blind Channel, as is similar to developments that are ongoing there now. Developers shall register the floodproofing covenant, which sets out the flood construction levels, and as has come up recently, just to clarify, the floodproofing covenant does not regulate building setbacks.
This is just a list of notable schedules that are attached to the PDA. So the subdivision servicing covenant to provide for security for the main road and the infrastructure located in that road. The floodproofing covenant, environmental contamination covenant, which basically says you have to follow provincial regulations when it comes to site cleanup. The industry covenant, which is for noise impact. Rental pool covenant, which is a bit of an odd one. It provides allowance for seasonal or temporary rentals in some of the areas. So it doesn't mandate it, but it allows it. And then of course the zoning bylaw and the subdivision development control bylaw are attached as schedules as well. And that's what locks those two bylaws in. So in terms of making changes to the PDA, there's 2 ways that the PDA can be changed. Or 3 ways. There's the minor amendment, which is it doesn't require a bylaw amendment of the PDA, which is also a bylaw in itself. But it requires a council resolution and agreement on both parties to make a minor change to the agreement. And then there's a major amendment. So matters that trigger an amendment to the zoning bylaw or the subdivision development control bylaw would also require an amendment to the PDA, and we've recently gone through the research and development facility, which was an amendment to the PDA and zoning bylaw. So this is done just like a normal bylaw. It has to go through a public hearing process, has to have the 3 readings and an adoption. And then there are a number of changes that under the Local Government Act are exempt from having to secure a landowner's agreement. So if there were any legislative changes and those changes impacted the PDA, then that doesn't require an owner's agreement to it. Changes to comply to an order of court or arbitrator or another direction in respect to which the local government has a legal requirement to obey. So if the court's told the local government to do something, then that doesn't require the owner's agreement. And finally, changes that in the opinion of the local government are necessary to address a hazardous condition of which the local government was not aware at the time when it entered into the phase development agreement. So if we weren't aware that there was a flood risk or something of that matter, and we later found out that there was, indeed, that would require an owner's agreement. And that's it for the presentation.
Great. Council, any questions for staff? So just to clarify too, the RTE is not in the PDA, it's a separate standalone policy that council has discretion over.
The RTE? The tax exemption? No, it's not.
It's not part of it.
It's not part of the PDA. Any, yeah, Councilor Kent.
I know there's a considerable amount of soil to be dredged out to create the park, and they're talking about taking that from the Mountain Blind Channel. What about contaminants in that soil? Because I'm sure there are considerable underneath all that, mercury, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, those would certainly have to go through their own process with MOE and the federal government. I know in the past, when district has undertaken dredging, we only could go to a certain level and not below, so this would probably be the same case here.
Okay.
I can speak to that. When I was on the SODC board in my first term of council, SODC commissioned a study to look at that very issue and found that the soils more or less opposite the mouth of the Squamish River are not contaminated with mercury. They went down to a depth of a meter below where they would dredge to and checked, and the only thing they're contaminated with is salt, oddly enough, which in some cases is a contaminant, but apparently if it's going back into salt water, it's not an issue. So those are clean, good soil, actually. But you're absolutely right, it's a concern, whatever you put there.
Well, depending on where they would take it from.
Coming out of the Squamish outflow, but
Yeah.
the lands closer that need to be dredged on the SODC lands, which were contaminated at one point. I'm not
Exactly.
sure that
The
was,
study didn't look at anything
Yeah.
else except the.
Yeah.
That's my concern, is where they're taking it from and what might be in that soil.
So it would have to go through a separate process.
yeah. And that provincial government would be regulating and.
Yes.
Any questions? And we do invite participation and questions and comments from the audience. If there's anyone who wants to ask away, you're welcome to. I don't see anyone. This was just a bit of a refresher to make sure, as we've had our first DP that came forward, well, I guess we're ratifying it fairly soon, or the DP is coming to council for consideration, final consideration. But this is sort of a prep as more of these come more frequently, that it's top of mind. It's just a,
Thanks. Is there any timelines currently right now as far as park? The way I understood the development is that in order to build anything else, the park had to be completed because of the capping of the land for environmental regulations.
The park itself in the PDA is tied to residential or the tourist facility development.
But not industrial or anything.
No.
any employment lands
Any
can,
employment.
yeah, can be done prior to the park, but all residential can't have occupancy until.
That's right.
That's- okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Does the PDA, there's the issue of floodproofing in the downtown area, for example, along the Blind Channel, is being protected by a dike, in this case a sheet pile dike, a vertical dike. But around the ocean front, can you speak to that? We've just gone through the development permit application on the Cattermole side, where it's going to be essentially a green shore, but raised for floodproofing. Is that considered a dike, or is there any requirement for protection of an internal area there, or will the whole area be raised up? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so that's not specifically required or referenced in the PDA. So that will be done as per other agreements. Essentially, the reports that were contemplated to, or were developed to generate the FCLs for the floodproofing covenant, they spoke to raising the entire ocean front, not considering the outside of dike, but shoreline erosion protection. So those are, it's a bit of a gap, but like I said, the reports that went into developing the FCLs that will govern the elevation at which the building's constructed did contemplate that scenario. So moving forward for development permits, we can ensure that that's taken into consideration.
And then on the blind channel side, presumably it would be something similar to what we're seeing now in front of Shirako and Mistral. More or less a vertical dike up to that FCL, and they would backfill to that level and build accordingly. But if that's not a dike, then I know it's a bit of a different discussion, but what then protects the downtown area at the south end if it's not the ocean front? So between the Cattermole, more or less, and the blind channel.
Yep, it's a very good question. And that will require some work. The Integrated Flood Hazard Management Plan speaks to how a raised oceanfront peninsula can tie into the existing dike infrastructure in the downtown area to basically provide a continuous barrier, essentially, from rising flood levels. So it will be something that will require some more thought when it comes to the design of how that we bring that dike from the downtown peninsula around and tie it in to the shoreline erosion protection.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Don't see any more. Thank you.
No.
Okay, go ahead.
Sorry. So back to the shoreline. Cattermole, more or less green shores. Mamcram Blind Channel, more or less a vertical hard shore. But the south end, at the park, where the park, which is going to be filled to create the park. But what sort of an edge is proposed for the south end?
It's contemplated as, it's kind of referenced in the presentation, it's contemplated as Green Shores principles incorporated into that design. It does specify in the PDA that the Green Shores consideration should be for the Cattermole, but also other portions of the shoreline. The Mamcram Blind Channel is specifically referenced as a different treatment. But it's contemplated that around the park it will be sort of a dune, sandy, low-grade treatment, which would essentially satisfy a lot of green shore principles.
With some erosion protection, presumably.
Can you point out on the map where that transition would go from the Cattermole to the park in terms of the treatment of the portion?
It would likely be at the
Where
southwest.
the red dot is, basically?
Yeah, roughly, yeah.
No, Cattermole. Sorry, no, Mamcram Blind Channel. So,
Yeah, so the lower, right where that is, that's kind of the southeast corner of the development land. So it's contemplated that that area will be kind of like
beach is green shore,
starting to
Yeah.
the south of that, yes.
Yeah.
So
Where
there'll be
the
some
blue-
sort of transition there.
yeah, with that red dot, intersects the blue line there. Is that clear? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
See, we weren't too bad. Next up, item 4.2, inclusionary zoning.
You intend to come back?
Oh yeah, we need, all right, we'll take a 1 minute recess while we gather. So we are in our community development meeting and we're on item 4.2, inclusionary zoning. I asked that this be put on the agenda, coming out of our community venue contribution conversation of last week. A lot of the stuff we were talking about in terms of affordable housing and mixed income neighborhoods, and how do we make sure we're achieving those housing diversity goals, was really a conversation about some sort of inclusionary housing program, practice, zoning. So I thought it'd be a good idea to, for council and the community to have that conversation. So we start to maybe start thinking about how we might actually implement and bring forward policies and something that would achieve the goals that we keep talking about. So, Jonas, do you want to just maybe kick it off a little bit, or do you want this to be a little more free flowing? And again, anyone can participate in this conversation. Just come on up to the table.
Yes, we talked the last meeting we talked about some of the things are being the community amenity contribution, and others just being a land use issue. So things like size of units or rental housing that's market housing, being something that we could just put into the zoning bylaw as a density bonus provision.
Would it have to be a density bonus provision, or I mean, true inclusionary zoning is simply creating the opportunity for the mixed income housing piece, so more diversity of housing within a zone, and encouragement of certain percentages if that's the case, versus actual purpose-built rental versus some sort of subsidized form of affordable housing or rental housing, whether it's homeownership or not. And I think maybe we'll try to focus this into two pieces of the conversation. Is one, what are our goals in terms of housing, and two, what are the tools, whether it's inclusionary zoning or density bonusing, to get the inclusionary zoning or other policies that need to be sort of filled in to get us there.
As far as I understood, that Canada, BC, has rules against anything that's called inclusionary zoning. So they made a special exception for the 20% rule in Vancouver, and we can, what municipalities are allowed to do is density bonusing, comprehensive density, which takes on some of the aspects of inclusionary zoning, but doesn't actually, without the title of inclusionary zoning, and actually is very, very specific about what municipalities are allowed to accomplish with. And I would agree with Mayor that deciding what our goals are and what our tools that are available to us within legislation is something maybe staff has to bring back. And it is only Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver currently that have those programs going on. So I'd be interested in any municipalities that have programs going on that are zoning related, that are around our municipality's size, where you can preset zoning for specific lands, but generally lands already purchased have to be excluded because they can't, because of the developers' cost for the land.
Well, not just purchase, I mean, people are going for a rezoning, they can do their current zoning.
If they can, but just reading about the law practices is that if you say afterwards, you can say afterwards, but developers generally push back because they purchase land based on how much they can bring back. So if there's density bonusing or anything on specific lots, it was, I used to think it was relatively easy to implement policy, but the legislation.
And I think the term inclusionary zoning in the States means a little bit different than something in Canada, and there's all sorts of tools that they do in the States to get the mixed housing forms within certain zones or certain areas. And I think maybe it's a matter of it's inclusionary. I think maybe we're getting hung up on the word inclusionary. And some of it is how do we density bonus to actually get purpose-built, rental, affordable this, and some of it is how do we make sure that we're achieving diversity of housing for all income levels within neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. And we're currently, and we see it tonight, townhomes, single-family lots and condos, and nothing in between.
Yeah.
And so that whole middle housing piece is completely absent from the development vernacular these days, it seems. So, so I think it's a bit of a two-pronged conversation about what can we do to augment the tools that we have, and what can we do to actually get affordable housing, if you want to call that inclusionary zoning, or maybe take the word zoning out, inclusionary practices. Maybe there's a way to soften that, but that's the conversation. Ted.
Yeah, thanks. But it's also if we wanted to park in an area and the guy said, oh, I want to do a subdivision here, we could say, oh, well, we'll give you more density if you put a park in, right?
That's not inclusionary zoning.
No?
There'll be density bonusing.
So this is specifically for affordable housing?
No,
No.
it's what I said, two
Specifically
things,
for-
affordable housing and getting a proper housing mix for all income levels.
So we make that decision? So the planning department decides what that mix is, or we decide?
Well, no, that's
that
what we're
mix is?
trying to, that's the conversation we're having today,
Yeah.
to talk about, that's why we're here.
Yeah, so the planning department can make that call, or do we make that call?
Karen,
Well,
I'm gonna let Jonas think about it. We'll
Think
go,
about
yeah, Karen.
So what are the tools at our disposal if we want to encourage both affordable housing and mixed uses of housing?
Well, mixed uses are very simple. You know, we do have tools such as, you know, setting a requirement for, let's say, a certain number of units being a certain size, or a certain number of bedrooms being included. We can do that through the zoning bylaw. But once we get into setting aside rental or affordable, that I think can only come through density bonusing. It couldn't come through anything else really.
So just to build on that, for example, pretty much every senior I meet out there who's currently in their large home that they've been the family home, a lot of them want to downsize to a small bungalow. We don't have any way of somehow encouraging that type of housing stock in the community. We don't have any way of encouraging garden apartments in the community. We don't have any way of really encouraging even work-live, and we have some zones that help that out, but we're just getting these homogenized neighborhoods.
Yes.
And so how do we get those other, that sort of fill in those housing gaps within the whole stock, the housing stock? Okay, then I've got, so think about that, think about what Ted was saying too. I'll go to Susan then.
Thanks. When I think about comprehensive density, and there's a lot of restrictive policy that we have that, like I think about our FCL policy. And I know it's specific to our region having an FCL construction level, but for a 150-year flood, we are losing out on the entire 15 kilometers of our low, like Brackendale and all the downtown area that has to be built up. And I know that every time I walk up my stairs, I think of seniors that wouldn't be able to do the same. You know, that we don't have that ground level where every place, there's places built on the ocean, communities built on the ocean. And maybe it's bad climate change policy, but we think about like sea level rise, you're making people dike for their house, like the housing is the diking instead of the diking being the diking. And I think it really makes affordability an issue and seniors housing an issue. So that's one thing I think about. And having a percentage that is low-end market affordable versus having it be for needed housing, like splitting 30% is what Montreal does with their policy. That 15% is low-end market, whether it be purchase or rental, and then 15% is social housing. So, and then having density bonusing seems to be the only way to get there before a piece of land is purchased, like setting land aside and saying, these lands here have the option to be density bonused. You can go this high, and if you go any higher, you have to have units included.
So, and just to clarify, that's a way to encourage currently existing zones,
Yeah.
whereas if someone's coming for rezoning, we have much more opportunity to create different parameters.
Yes, and even if somebody owns a property, that doesn't mean that their zoning is going to stay the same. So you could add density bonusing, reduce the density that's currently there, and return it back for a density bonusing system.
Yeah, well, that kind of cleared up what I was thinking, but it would help to have real clear definitions of what we want. Like you say, affordable, what is affordable? And the smaller units, how small? I mean, if you had, like a shopping list, and someone coming along wanting to do something, like Susan says, 15% of this and 20% of this, and build this many. But, you know, I'm not in that game, so I don't understand what the target is. I mean, I know we want affordable housing, but I don't understand what the target is. So if someone comes in and says, I've got 3 lots, I want to consolidate, and I want to get as many units on there as I can, and then the planner says, okay, we need 10 affordable, which is, I don't know what affordable is, 400,000?
Well, we have a definition for affordable.
Yes, it's 80% of the income, average income. So people that make up to 80% of average income, 30% of their income goes to housing, and that's considered affordable. Anything above that is
And
not.
that's based on household income, so
Yes.
if our average household income is $100,000 a year,
Squamish is.
so 80% would be $80,000 a year,
Yes.
and we would say 30% of $80,000 is what would be considered affordable housing.
That's right, and that
And
would
then-
include your heating costs, your hydro, not just your rent or the housing.
So we have a formula for that, and there's social housing or subsidized housing, there's affordable housing. Within that realm, there's also purpose-built rental and a couple of other things through BC Housing or other opportunities.
Well, there's purpose-built rental that's just market,
Exactly.
that could go above the affordable housing threshold. And then there's the non-market rental that would fall within affordable housing, I would say.
Yeah. So I guess some of my concern comes from, we're getting some very large developments coming, we've got a couple of them tonight, there's a lot of talk about affordable housing, but there actually aren't actual deliverables within the plans.
Mm-hmm.
And there's sort of this line that, well, we're just adding more supply, therefore that will help the demand out. And that's sort of just the rationale out there. But it's really not actually delivering X amount of purpose-built rental, X amount of this middle housing stock that is currently not being built today. It's not actually delivering, you know what I mean? And with the zoning, it says, well, you can do all those things within that, and what happens is they all get built out to the maximum value, which isn't delivering the mixed income housing that we're looking for. So, I think that's what we're trying to figure out, is how do we, while still come on up the table, while still ensuring that people who own land can realize value of their land too, so. Meg, welcome.
Mayor Heinzman. My name is Megan Reynolds. I'm with the House on Women's Center, and I thought I would offer a couple of additional thoughts for council and staff to consider. We've been doing a lot of work on the affordable housing side of things on the social services side. One of the first things I would point out is that inclusionary zoning would ideally be focused on providing housing in areas that are needed most. What we've identified that as the core rental needs for individuals under $30,000 a year, and that would need to be supported with wraparound services to ensure the maintenance of tenancies and supporting those ongoing tenancies. I would also add that the success of the Housing First models in other communities supports the importance of mixed community-based housing over congregate housing. That is also an evidence-based system, and there are a lot of really wonderful success stories around the communities across Canada on that. We also want to ensure that there is no short or long-term loss of rental stock in Squamish. And then I think lastly, any inclusionary zoning policies or density bonusing would need to adapt to the changing needs of the community, so we want it to be flexible as well.
Absolutely.
So based on our affordable housing numbers, how much rent would someone with an income of 30,000 pay? 80% of their income?
Well, the current definition of affordable housing would capture somebody that makes 80% of the average household income.
No, I realize that, but if you make 30,000, you're way below the average income. What rent would that work
Well,
out to?
30% of 30,000, that's 10,000.
So that's, so that, now you're looking at places that are renting for 700 and 800 a month. Right?
For a single person, you might
Yeah,
rent a
that's fine. I'm
house and
just
have
trying to
4
get the number.
roommates, yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
I mean, that's good to know.
Yeah, that's the number that we've been talking about. Come on up.
If I can offer some insight to that question as well. Some of the work that we've been doing, if we were to look at an individual earning in and around the $25,000 range, if you're looking at 30% of household income as the affordability delineation, you would have a bachelor priced at $600 a month, a 1-bedroom priced at $825 a month, a 2-bedroom at $950 a month, and a 3-bedroom at $1,110 a month. So that is drastically different than what we're seeing in terms of market rates.
How are you coming up with those numbers for a 3-bed?
This is based on affordability levels for those who are on accessing income assistance or other forms of income assistance, or who fall below that $30,000 range. You might be able to add a little bit extra to that, sort of gap between $25,000 and $30,000 a year. But that is
You're talking about one income earner per
that's a
3-bedroom
single
home.
income earner, yes. Yeah, that's based on a single income earner.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, based on those numbers, I mean, the 600 for a little suite, I could see that. You could find some little spots for 600. 3-bedroom place for 1,000? Well, I mean, I could actually see that probably, that's where we'd have to get into the density bonusing for that. They'd have to be really small.
Well, they'd have to be subsidized.
And that's if you are talking about those who are in that most vulnerable component of our housing continuum, yes. Yeah.
Things, just every time we get into these discussions, I just think we're so far behind the 8 ball with the amount of, we have rezonings coming tonight. Things are being used up without any mechanism, so I appreciate this discussion being on the agenda, but without a management, without having a housing authority, without being able to take in units, depending on the size of the buildings, we've lost out on so many units that could have been affordably priced and maintained by a housing authority. And the other task that I think that we have to put our minds to is basically, once we start taking in units, and it should be like every zoning we have coming towards us is a density bonusing program. So we're lacking the policy, we're behind on the policy, but having not, I appreciate all our social services being so involved in the conversation, and maybe it ends up being a partnership with the social services, but tasking a real estate management to a social services is a conversation we need to have as well. So those are all very big conversations that need to start happening. I fear with all the rezonings going on, we should hold off. And it's gonna slow everything down to manage to be able to get units that we can have as affordable units, as opposed to what's happening now, where every time a zoning comes through, we ask for things, we can't manage them, we don't have any management scheme to actually.
That's why we're having this conversation. So
Yeah,
we
but
can-
it's,
Right the track.
we have a position coming on that we're spending money on, and we are behind on policy, so I'd just like to see it giddy up.
That's what we're doing.
One of the
We've
things,
had this conversation so many times.
one of the things that this position will involve is developing the policy that we need. With some of the developments coming forward, they are going to be providing affordable housing to our definition, and it will be managed by the developer. So the district will set that criteria of eligibility, and then the district will have to monitor to make sure that that is being implemented on an annual basis. But we wouldn't be taking on those units.
Can I just follow up with that question? So one thing I think about is who pays for the extra units, where does the money come from for all of the units and for managing? You know, if it's not being managed by, you know, does the developer have the responsibility to provide the same services as our community does? I don't think so. You know, I think it's a bad form of management to trust a developer to manage affordable units.
So I think certainly if it's subsidized housing,
Yeah.
some kind of
Which is what
subsidized,
we need.
is the piece of it. And it's, yeah, I think we all agree with that. I think some of the is, and we're starting to see that, and there's, on the agenda tonight, there's 50 purpose-built rentals with the waterfront planning proposal. That's market purpose-built rental with covenants.
No, they will be affordable. They will be under that
Oh, okay, those ones are, yeah.
definition of affordable housing. So there will be a cap on the units, and there will be a mix of units included in that 50.
But I think what I'm trying to hear is that we want the subsidized units because we need them, as Meg pointed out. We want the purpose-built rentals so we can give people who are renting some assurance that they're not going to be rent evicted or someone sells their condo when they have to leave, and et cetera. So we have purpose-built market rental that we'd like to achieve through rezoning. So we can technically, or maybe this is a question, can we technically, under the current legislation, require that developments, let's say above 50 units or whatever, must achieve X percentage of this and X percentage of that?
As a density bonus. So
But if we're rezoning something, aren't we density bonusing by definition?
absolutely, if we're
Yeah.
rezoning something,
So if it's a rezoning,
then yes, you enter it, you negotiate,
Yeah.
and then put a housing agreement on.
and if it's
on
an
title.
existing zoning, we can density bonus to get some of that.
Yes.
Okay. Is that clear for everybody?
So we're not too bad. We can't require it.
We can through rezonings. And I think, yeah, okay, and that's just sort of the subsidized rental and purpose-built rental. That's those two pieces, let alone the mixed income housing, variety of housing piece, which is a whole other.
Yes.
Karen?
Well, that's kind of where I wanted to talk about next, is we do have some tools to require this, because I think what we're trying to avoid is ghettos of low-income housing. We want it distributed across the community, we want people integrated, we want them to be part of the social fabric, whether you're in subsidized housing, which is supported by our social services, or whether you're in affordable rental, purpose-built, or whether you're in market rental. I mean, there's so many
We
different
want
levels.
diverse income neighborhoods too.
But despite the fact that council is looking for mixed types of housing, we're not seeing those types of developments come forward yet. And so how do we move that ball forward to, like the mayor said, get small bungalows, get a diversity of housing types, rather than building to the max allowable, which is to maximize profit, but doesn't help us build what we want to build in our community. So what are our tools in that regard?
So there's rezonings.
I know I'm putting you on the spot.
And we can negotiate things like, having a limit on size of units, even if it's single-family units.
So for example, if we have a proposal with 100 units, can we say 20% of those units, there's a lower height, so you have to build only one-story bungalows? Can you do that?
You can.
You can dictate through the zoning bylaw building type, building size, floor areas. So you could specify that it needs to be X percent, needs to be any type of dwelling unit. It's where you get into specifying who's in that unit at what income level. That's when you've got to negotiate for density bonus. If you wanted to set or prescribe limits or ranges for how many apartments, townhouses, single-family units, bungalows, duplexes you want, you can do that. It's tricky, but you could dictate through the zoning bylaw and require anything to do with respect to building size or building form.
Yeah, but wouldn't we then end up with a whole bunch of sort of tailored zones rather than, how would we spread this out through the community? So if someone, to Ted's example, accumulates 3 lots in a residential zone. So, do we do we change the residential zoning to allow for that more prescribed view, or?
Yeah, most of our zoning zones have these sort of single family or duplex and townhouse and apartment or apartment. So if you want to see the range, we're going to need to design zones that have a greater range of residential uses across them.
You're still, you're still creating homogeneous zones though. Which is, I think, what we're trying to get away from.
Well, you could prescribe in the zone a certain percentage being a certain type of housing. So that if you end up with a bigger property that has multiple unit potential, then that breaks into having to build, only 30% of the lot could be built a duplex or a townhouse.
Yeah.
And my other question is, I'm wondering, does it make more sense to plan for these kinds of different mixed uses at a neighborhood level or at a per application level? So that's the other challenge is how do we get a big picture view of what North Yards will look like 15 years from now, Brackendale, Highlands. And that's, certainly the argument that some of the developments are making now is that this type of housing is needed now. But what we're trying to encourage is a mixed use across all of our neighborhoods into the future. So if we just look at it per application, we might end up not with what we want. But if we wait to do neighborhood planning, we're going to miss the ball, or the boat. So I'm not quite sure where the happy medium lies there.
Ted and then Megan, Susan.
Well, I thought I
Sorry,
heard
okay.
when someone was coming in for rezoning, we actually do have tools, if I heard Gary right, to say to people, we want these type of units. And so we're having these rezonings coming in all the time. And that's what I was getting at in the beginning. The planner could set the rules to what we want. In every development that comes in, we should get a percentage of what Sue was saying. Why are we not doing that now?
We are, that's what we advocate all the time for, is the diversity of housing. We don't always get it.
But why aren't we getting it?
Ultimately, it is council's decision when it comes to rezonings or bylaw amendments.
Are they coming to us, or are they not coming to us? I don't remember, it seems to me with the rezonings, we're supporting, I don't know, I think I can remember one that we didn't support. The rest we've supported. And so I'm saying, that's what I'm saying. The planning department has the authority to say, we want what we want. Draw that and bring it in and council will look at it. But I think what's happening is the guys are saying, well, I don't want to draw that. This is what I want to draw. So take that. You take that to council. So.
And we don't always support it. When we look at our OCP, ultimately it's council's decision whether to let something through or not. We will always advocate for a mix of housing types and tenures.
But are we getting them?
Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. Most of the time, I think smaller developments have a harder time to carry all that mix inside them, which is, we see quite a bit of that today. We also need to recognize that we are a growing community, and so through some of these small developments are excellent opportunities to diversify inside our neighborhoods. Not all of them are going to be able to provide the full spectrum of housing that we want, but Councillor Elliott was absolutely right. We need to do neighborhood planning in order to understand the big picture in each neighborhood. Otherwise, we are dealing on ad hoc basis here and there and trying to get what
But
we
in the
can.
interim, we should do the ad hoc.
That's what we're doing.
So then
I
we're
think-
getting these units.
We're not quite getting them. Meg. Susan, Doug, Derek.
To build on that, I think it does require long and short-term or short and long-term solutions. It would be an interesting exercise on a short-term basis to look at what's in the pipeline for development permits and projects and see how that is addressing our needs across the continuum of housing. And for those higher density projects, what is the opportunity to get to the table with those developers and discuss what it would take to bring the housing need or to address the housing need at the level that we need it addressed. And then understanding from a developer's perspective, what does that cost? I don't know that we really truly have a sense around what the cost is of bringing this housing into the community, and then what partners can we bring on board to help offset that cost if it doesn't currently exist in the coffers of the District of Squamish. And that's where BC Housing can play a really important role to making these projects work. And then I would support developing a really strong framework on how to ensure that this is part of the DNA of the District of Squamish and our development process for projects moving forward well into the future to ensure that we don't end up in this position 15 years from now as well.
There's the list of all the developments. Go over it.
Who wants to go next, Doug or Susan?
Doug hasn't.
Go ahead, Doug.
Thank you. So, interesting. A lot of different points, and I just listening to this, it strikes me to a significant extent we do have tools. What we really haven't focused in are the goals, and I take Councillor Chappelle's point about there's some legislation or legislative requirements, and I don't have the answer to that. I think I know in some cases zoning is grandfathered, and there are some grandfathering issues around that. But I think a zoning application coming to us with unzoned land or upzoning land, we have a lot of discretion on. So I think we have all of those tools. But I listening to the conversation, we're talking about at one time probably 3 or 4 different things. So one is we're talking about a housing mix, a market housing mix in the community. And how do you deal with all of the different housing needs at market? And so the mayor's talked about bungalows for seniors, and I've heard that comment from other councillors before, which essentially I guess is a 1-floor building, so people don't have to go up and downstairs. And there's nothing preventing that happening today. If somebody wants to buy a lot and build a 1-floor house, there aren't a lot of those around because typically it's not maximizing the value of the lot and reduces the investment potential of a property. And when people buy properties, that's in the back of their mind is the investment potential. So I'm not sure there's anything stopping that today, and whether you actually need to mandate that in a subdivision. People can buy vacant lots in a subdivision and build a 1-story house if they want to do that. To force a developer to create that, basically you're reducing the value of that particular lot. So then, because it's not worth as much as a 2-story or a 3-story house or whatever the maximum might be, so then how do you deal with that? And so is it a density thing, or do you give them zoning at all if they don't put that in there? So once again, I think we have to focus on what our goal really is there. The second thing is the forms of housing in this mid-range, and I read about this stuff in the Vancouver papers about the different, there's a middle group of housing that we're missing. I don't know that we're quite missing that in Squamish. I mean, there's apartment condominiums, there's townhouses of every size from about 1,000 to 2,500 square feet. There's duplexes, and there's single-family homes, both large and small. There may be other classes, I'm just not aware of them. And we can maybe fine-tune in there if we're not getting what we want. So I think we have tools to deal with that. Maybe we just don't have a focus on what might be missing. And I'm not sure anything is missing in that range. So the stuff is there. When you start talking about the housing spectrum, though, the thing that we're seem to be short of is rental properties, because most developers, there are a couple of exceptions, but most developers like to build and sell, and they make the most money now and they go on to the next project, as opposed to being in the long-term rental business or turning around and selling the building to a pension plan or something like that. That's something, yeah, we can covenant that, rezoning. I think we can do that, and we've done that, purpose-built rentals. And we have another proposal tonight that has some purpose-built rentals at market. And those would be owned by the developer, and the developer would deal with them. But it provides a niche in the housing market for people that don't have the capital or don't have the inclination to actually sink money into a house. So then you get into the sub-market stuff, and that's, I think, a little bit more challenging, because Because what I've heard tonight, this afternoon, is there's basically two different types. There's the affordable, as defined at the 80% number. And that is something you could ask a developer to do in return for something such as density bonusing. Because essentially when you go to those numbers, you know, there's probably exceptions, but you're more or less asking the developer to build that at cost. You're taking out the developer's profit from that at 80%, approximately, maybe not exactly. So what is it that would make a developer inclined to build something at cost? And what do they get for it? Well, if they get the rest of the development that they want, it's not such a bad deal. But if it starts chipping away at that, it can become a bad deal and can affect the overall economic viability of their development. And then you start kind of putting a lid on the whole development process and making it uninviting for people to develop at all. And so that's a balance. And I think in my mind, density bonusing is the way to go. And also when you're talking sub-market and purpose-built rental, the other thing is the types of units. And everything I've read about it, and I'm hardly an expert about it, but it seems that the shortage is in 2 and 3 bedroom rentals, not studios, not 1 bedrooms. You're okay for one person, you're okay for perhaps a couple, but it becomes more challenging to find a place you can rent for a small family or even a larger family. Where do you put 3 kids, for example, in that scenario? And so if you're going to go into that, we have to kind of try to define the different ranges of that to make it work. And that works, I think, for both the market and the sub-market, so-called affordable housing. What Meg's talking about, I think, is something entirely different, because those numbers, from my understanding, would be way below developer cost, and you could not look to the private sector for that. So now we're talking about partnerships with BC Housing or something like that. And I think we're inclined to do that. And we have, as a municipality, you know, we're no different than anybody else, limited resources that way to put money into it. Sometimes we have land, we have zoning ability, certainly. Sometimes we can do things like waive DCCs and so forth to help make these things grow, but significantly the cash for those things is going to come from probably the province. But once again, and maybe the partner's decision on what type of housing it might be, but it's probably not one type of housing, it's probably several different sizes and so forth to accommodate the range of different people that might use it. But I think from our part, we just have to focus on the goals. I think as a starting point, and if there are legislative things we have to do after that, easy enough to do.
And you only list about half of the missing middle housing forms that are considered that missing middle, so we could list them off. And I think the piece that we are achieving some townhomes, we're getting some single-family homes, getting some condo, but they're all done in distinct neighborhoods. And we're not creating that integration on one street, which is another part of the problem. And in one neighborhood.
If I can just respond to that, because I think where that takes you is into CD zones as opposed to just zones where you just customize the zone.
And that could be the policy tool that we use to get there.
Because then you can say this one is this, and the next one is that, and the next one is something else, and you can
Yeah.
just do it
And
the
you
way you
can
want.
articulate the,
Neighborhood.
Susan.
Thank you. Employee housing, and the main point I want to bring up is somehow we have an OCP coming with 1 day of integration, but you know, this is a place where we have like May 24th, like as far as neighborhood planning, the zoning and everything should have been set in the OCP with density, with where we are, future density, with middle range housing. All those questions should have gone to the public in the OCP. And we've addressed a lot of things in the OCP, but we haven't addressed housing form and type and inclusionary zoning. Any of these things that should have gone to the public should have come forward in the OCP. And I don't see that we can do that on May 24th from 6 to 8 p.m. I just don't see the proper amount of public notice or involvement with how we're doing zoning for housing and density bonusing and all of the things that we should have. Neighborhood planning is in our OCP. Why, how did that get separated from an OCP? An official community plan should have all of those things in there and should have been brought to the public with all of those things
Gary,
done.
It does.
thank you.
Okay, with no public engagement,
No,
or sorry, 87 respondents.
no, we've had a lot more than that. But going forward, we're releasing the material on May 11th. And there'll be at least a month for people to respond to that online. The 24th is one event.
Zero.
There's pop-up events.
Yes, there will
Yeah.
be. Sarah is planning, we have days of pop-up events with going around the community to reach people where they are. So we've got direct face-to-face on the 24th. Yes, that's the only time it will be direct
With mapping
face-to-face.
and everything else.
Yep, we've got online for the month, so between the 11th and the 24th, you've essentially got almost 2 weeks to review that material. There is housing policy and neighbourhood planning policy in abundance in that. We're welcoming people's feedback on that, and then every time we're out on the mobile pop-up events, we'll be pushing people to get feedback. So there's a month long of feedback. It's not one night, it's not 2 hours, it's a month.
And this is what we budgeted for from a year ago, so go ahead.
So when the times for the 11 years that we had the OCP out there, we did a lot of engagement with it. The first time it was engaged, there was weekly events with mapping and huge amounts of decision-making going on in person. I think that an online survey does not capture the amount of information that's in an OCP, and most people won't do it. We've seen that in our online respondent surveys. It hasn't worked. So maybe we need to look at budgeting for one more event, or because having that one event where you have mapping and everything that you need to have those tools, because these are all things that should have
That's
been
something
done.
we can consider. We've talked about this many times, the engagement program with the OCP. This is what council directed a year ago. This is a plan that's been in front of council for a year and a half now. I'm not sure where you got this impression that there was massive amounts of engagement with the last OCP when it was done in 2004, 2003. We've done more engagement on this OCP than by far that we did on that OCP. So I'm not sure where you're getting that impression. Councillor Elliott.
I just wanted to get us back on topic because we're supposed to be talking
Yeah,
about
we are.
inclusionary zoning.
Yeah, and I have one more thing to.
Okay,
add,
so let's, yes, you
Off of
take
that
every
topic.
opportunity to talk about the fact you don't believe there's enough engagement on the OCP.
Yes.
You never put a motion forward, so unless you're gonna put a motion forward, we'll save it to the end of the agenda because we're on inclusionary zoning now. So on inclusionary zoning.
Right.
So I don't have.
On inclusionary.
No, she still has the floor.
On inclusionary zoning, the other missing piece that is a possibility is Calgary is doing co-op seniors housing. But they have, the municipality provides grants for seniors to renovate their homes so that they can have a suite inside their homes. So as they grow out of their single family home, instead of having to relocate them, if we don't have anywhere to relocate them, and I know we will have great seniors housing that we have it coming down the pipe, but if a senior wants to age in place, which is sometimes very important and needs to be a part of that spectrum, the government does granting and a service that will renovate and provide a suite where part of entering that suite is that you help care for things like the lawn and gardening and everything. And it's a really great model to allow age in place, and it's a co-op, but it's a co-op that's located everywhere. So it has centralized servicing, and through the municipality granting to afford changing into suites. So that's something that's already been done that might be a model to look at as far as allowing seniors to age in place as opposed to relocating.
Karen.
So, taking Doug's comments into consideration, I think the goal for me is that people have the choice of the neighborhood they live in the type of housing that they want. So that if they want to live in the Highlands, they can live in the Highlands, whether they make $1 million a year or they make $30,000 a year. And that would apply anywhere, that we're building mixed neighborhoods that accommodate all income levels and types of housing. So that would be my goal, is that we're creating a community that people have a choice of neighborhood and a choice of housing type. I think for me, what stands out in this conversation is for the person who's going to be supporting our housing initiatives, is that we need a common dictionary or understanding of all these terms: market, subsidized, affordable. You know, people talk all the time about affordable, but you have to ask the question, what does that mean? And it means different things to different people. And so I feel like we need sort of a cheat sheet all the time about what affordable means across the spectrum of housing. And, you know, I'm just struggling with, on rezonings, we should be pushing to include different housing types, that sort of thing. But in terms of broader planning, it's not being, you know, I still want creative, interesting developments to come forward, and I don't really want to create a whole district of CD zones. But at the same time, you know, I wonder if there's a happy medium so that where we designate our neighborhood hubs, we build up from there in terms of what we want to see around those hubs in terms of mixed use and interesting neighborhood concepts. But the farther out you get, you leave zoning sort of up to, you know, maybe more loosely structured. I don't know, I'd be interested to sort of see what other municipalities are doing along those lines to try and create interesting neighborhoods without being overly prescriptive, or else our zoning bylaw will be monstrous.
That's the fine line that we're trying to
Yeah.
figure out.
I know, it's not necessarily totally clear to me yet how to do that.
Yeah, Councillor Bryan.
Yeah, thanks. Well, that's interesting. I like the idea about having a cheat sheet on terminology around affordable housing. I think that's a good idea, to be like our bylaw. So I just went on the rental thing here, just what people were talking. So you can get a 3-bedroom for 22, 3-bedroom for 24, 1-bedroom for 13. You can share a place, you get a room for 800, you can get a room for 700. And one guy's rent went up $500. So that was just going on the rental. So we're not hitting the numbers here after it. Susan talked about co-ops. I don't think we have anything in there for boarding houses. I like the idea of boarding houses. For some people, that might be a nice way to live.
I don't think we have anything that prevents boarding houses.
No, we don't.
The basically hotels.
You can,
Well, if you
it
call it a
allows for
hotel,
boarding,
you can't
there's
have one,
only
but if
bylaws
you
for
call it
boarding.
a house, and if you've got a big house,
You can rent out a room, that's a boarding house.
can you?
There's nothing preventing it.
Anyway, I mean, anyway, I think that's, if that's okay in any neighborhood to have a boarding house, then, is that right?
You can have multiple boarding rooms in the house,
Okay, well, that's good.
as long as they're
So-
not self-contained suites. You know, there's a limit
Along
on
with
that.
our person that we're hiring to help with this kind of stuff, we've got 2 things coming on tonight. Let's see what we can do to get you some units.
Okay, that's a conversation for tonight.
No, but I'm just saying, you know, like, we're talking, I mean, when I hear planning neighborhoods, that makes me nervous because it won't be this council, it'll be next council still talking about it. So we're not winning in that scenario now. So I'm looking at winning now, and we can maybe win some tonight. And, so,
If I may, I'm going to put forward 2 motions so that we can sort of focus the debate on the motions, and I'll have staff freak out in a minute. The first one is that staff develop policy for council to consider to mandate through rezoning and density bonusing purpose-built market rental and subsidized rental housing with the goal of integration within new and existing neighborhoods and avoid ghettoization. Is that seconded? Seconded. Any comments or questions for discussion?
Management. Is that all going to come forward?
Well, that we have that position coming forward that will help figure out, that is, we're hired that position to figure out how we manage the units that may need to be managed. Some of these units may not need to be managed.
And also, I'd like the staff to look at the financial burden of both the density bonusing or comprehensive density.
And that'll come back
Yeah,
as
exactly.
we evaluate these.
Focus on the financial.
Yeah.
Do you mind reading that again?
Yeah, sure. That staff develop policy for council to consider, so we're asking them to go back and reflect on how do we achieve this goal, and then we'll consider it then. To mandate through rezoning and/or density bonusing, purpose-built market rental and subsidized rental housing with the goal of integration within new and existing neighborhoods and avoid ghettoization.
What I might add to that is I'm concerned that we don't have sufficient research to support how much housing and types of housing that we need in each part of the housing continuum.
And that's part of what I suspect staff will bring back, saying, you know, we don't have something that will support 10% or 5% or 3%, but if we do this research, we'll be able to get there. So that's sort of what I'm expecting some of this motion to inspire.
Right, and then the other piece I might add to that is not necessarily just honing in on those two parts of the housing continuum, but all parts of the housing
I've
continuum.
got another motion, honey. It's just one. I didn't want to put it all into one thing because some people might want to discuss more pieces or say, I agree with this, but so I broke it down into a couple different motions. But there's more of a mixed missing middle housing motion to come. So on that piece, Gary, I know you're freaking out now going, when are we going to do the work? Oh, perfect. I'll call the
To be
question.
honest, yeah, so
Are you sure? Do you want us?
the OCP's actually got some policy that speaks to this issue. It may not go far enough, but the genesis is there. We've heard that. It's sort of a layered approach. The OCPs are very strategic. There's probably another layer below that may be at the sub-area neighbourhood plan. But certainly ensuring that we deal with density bonusing and have policy to develop a mix is in the OCP. Part of the problem there is it says residential.
Exactly.
And there's some generic policy about a mix of housing, okay, but the next thing is, what do we mean by mix? And I think that's where we can, and I think that's where the current policy is going with respect to defining what mix is. And that may be where we need to get to with the OCP and getting council on board with.
And that's my next motion,
Yeah.
so, yeah. Okay, so I'll call the question on that, and I think it just puts a fine point on it. It's clear. It sounds like there's the beginning of that policy is developing through the OCP anyway, and I think this is insinuating that next layer needs to be there to actually drill it home. Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Second motion I'm hoping council will consider is that staff bring back policy for consideration to achieve more missing middle housing within rezoning applications, to achieve better integration of mixed income housing within rezoning applications, to allow for diversity of housing in all neighborhoods.
Before we second it, can you add some wording around missing middle housing?
Yeah, missing middle, the way I understand it is the housing that fits into existing neighborhoods in terms of form, character, and that type of thing, but is giving more housing choice within the neighborhood. So we're talking about things that are in that 3-story range, or 2-story range, 1-story range that fits into existing neighborhoods. And the way they define missing middle in terms of urbanists or planners, as I understand it, so we get a lot of single detached homes, whether they're small lot, large lot. We get single detached homes. We get a lot of condos. In Squamish, we seem to get a lot of townhomes, particularly homogeneous neighborhood developments. What's missing, which we aren't getting, are a lot of is triplexes, fourplexes, courtyard apartments, bungalow courts, multiplexes, live work, integrated within neighborhoods, not simply this whole thing's going to be live work and this whole thing's going to be townhomes and this whole this is going to be an apartment. And different ranges of apartment sizes. We tend to go, our apartments are really big as opposed to small scale apartments that fit well into a single family neighborhood, so that you have that integrated within the neighborhood that doesn't feel out of place, for example. That's how this missing middle that planners are starting to espouse, is just articulating what we're not getting. And I think and we talked about this for years within the housing continuum, is if you you fill in all those blanks within this, it actually frees up some of the area on the lower end of the spectrum so that you don't have as much pressure on the lower end of the spectrum, so you have technically more of it. Like it's all connected, right? Meg?
To add to that, while we in the social services sector generally are speaking more for those who are in crisis, our concern is that those who are in that missing middle will be in crisis in a matter of years in our community if the trajectory
If we don't
continues the way that it
Meet that
is.
demand.
So they will then become a very visible group of individuals as well. And again, there is a place for all members of the community in the housing continuum, and I think that that's our goal.
Mhm.
I'm concerned a little bit about gearing it to a part of the housing continuum rather than to our residents and our community members. And I'm wondering if perhaps language around geared to income to meet the income levels of our community level members might
Yeah,
be
that's
more
why
appropriate.
I did reference integration of mixed income housing. So what I meant is that someone who makes $30,000 a year can be in the same neighborhood as someone who's making $100,000 and not just have fishy-poshy and ghettoization, so it's actually integrated. So there is reference to it, it's just maybe the language isn't, yeah, fishy-poshy.
Fishy.
So I'll second that.
Thank you, yeah, go ahead.
And to be frank, I'm not sure that we don't have that now, and it's more a matter of location. It's the difference between a triplex in an 80-unit development versus a triplex that's over here surrounded by single-family homes, and maybe there is a difference, but for the user, I'm not sure. But in any event, I'd be happy to see some more information on that, so certainly we'll support the motion.
And I guess the challenge I get is, you know, we see it in some of the stuff tonight is, and we saw it in the, you'll see the oceanfront is, here is RS1, here is RS2, here is RS3, here is, you know, and we really do this segregation of housing forms. And like, literally, I want to see RS1, 2, R1, like all within an integrated neighborhood, not put all the townhomes here and put all the single family homes over here.
And that's what we often push for at the application stage as well, is mixing that
I know
diversity.
we push for it, but we're
not
not getting it. Yeah, go ahead.
Within that, Gary, you mentioned that there's a bunch of policy that's coming forward with the OCP. Can we pull that? I would like that myself and the public to really hone in on affordable housing practices with the OCP engagement. So I don't know if that night is the night to separate it and to have it as a station where people can actually see, this is our policy for affordable housing, this is our plans for densification, this is how we're addressing these issues.
And I wasn't at the meeting last night, but the community committee did meet to sort of, I think, try to hone in on making sure that through this last phase, not just at the event on the 24th, but through the whole, this phase of the engagement, that those real topical issues, for housing affordability probably being the biggest, are being really highlighted through the OCP process. Is that's happening?
We've got 5 stations, 5 or 6, 5 stations based on the goals that are established in the plan. So one of them will have the housing component. So we're planning on having staff and members of the committee there to say, you know what, if you're interested in the environment, you want to hit station number 3 first. If you're interested in housing, you want to hit station number 1. Because we appreciate that's a fat document.
Yeah.
Very few people are going to read the entire thing. So we want to be able to focus people on the areas they're interested in. So if it's growth management, go to station 2. If it's something else, go to station 5. So we are, and the same with the mobile, it's really trying to focus people on their areas of interest and have them hit that, and then they can come back and say, well, I'm done with housing, now I want to go on to growth management. Well, next table. So
Here's the next. So, yeah, absolutely.
the-
It needs to be highlighted within the OCP process.
we thought that perhaps there were probably 24 people that are going to read the entire document, and that's probably members of the committee council and probably half a dozen other people.
Hopefully more, it's fast.
Hopefully, but
And likely every development now. Maybe more than that, a couple dozen. Okay, there's a motion on the floor. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? You're opposed, Councillor?
No.
Oh, motion carried.
Doing it at the same time.
There was a question about OCP engagement, Councillor Chabot?
I just want to, if Five Stations on May 24th, is it possible that staff actually run 2 days of engagement? If people can't make it to a physical meeting, maybe it's 2 days in a row, so it doesn't have to be removed. But it just seems like having those stations is something that we haven't had really with. So I would like to see one more day added.
So, I mean, that's always the fine balance of, you know, we could do engagement through the wazoo and never get everybody, and so where's the balance?
Well, there will be multiple
And how much
opportunities.
do we have the funding, the budget currently staffing, the ability to add another full day of a big community?
I mean, could we can do it. These things are immense logistical nightmares to pull off. They take a long time to put together. I mean, we're 2 weeks out from it, 3 weeks out from it now. And we've been planning for 3 weeks previously, so you can't pull them off at the drop of a hat.
But if we're talking about
But
basically the
it's the
same
exact same
thing.
thing.
right?
Yeah, we
2
could.
days instead of 1
So
day.
what I would suggest is that
Well,
if towards the end of this phase, if we're not getting the level of engagement
I know.
that we can likely we can pull another one together at that time. So it's not beyond the realms of possibility, but it does take some time to sort of ramp up to it.
How are we measuring that engagement through?
We've been keeping numbers.
We will be measuring all of the people that participate, that we contact with, and then that we give information with, and then that we will be able to count the numbers of people that actually engage. So it's a matter of inform, we'll measure by context. What's the next one?
Well, we can certainly measure what we get online. We will know how many people walk in the room on 24th.
Yep.
We will know how many people on all
And then
these
we'll be able to
pop-up engagement pieces, whether it's at the market or on the buses or in front of the grocery stores or whatever they are. We can measure all those numbers. So,
We're going to, we'll just measure how many people we actually contact, how many people take information, and then how many people feedback. So three levels of engagement.
Councillor Elliott?
So just for some context, Sarah McDonough has 30 pop-up events scheduled between May 12th and June 11th. And so that's meeting people where they are, including engaging youth at the high school and at the youth center. And this is, you know, it's at the shopping malls, it's at the breweries, it's at the climbing
Senior
gym,
center.
it's at the senior center, it's at drop-off and pick-up times at the elementary schools. Like, she's trying to be everywhere where people are so that it's easy for them to engage and ask questions on the topics that are specific to their neighborhood. So she's broken it down by neighborhood.
And that's outreach engagement, which I
That's
think is
outreach.
very different than people who are going to be self-motivated to go to a meeting. So I like the fact that there's that diversity.
So
I've got a few
there's
people.
30.
Welcome. Hello, my name's Annie. I'm just recently moved back to Squamish, and I'm also an urban strategist who works on
Fantastic. Well,
plenty of urban issues and challenges. One for I was just thinking about for the OCP is with all the planned pop-up events is to have maybe some stats in advance so you can, how many % of the population do you want to reach out to seniors, to youth, to social services, so there's like a clear, so it's not just you're going to go show up and talk to a bunch of people, like we've talked to
having
like
target.
20, having like targets for goals for staff to go reach out to, and because that's a lot of work, community outreach for one person to do. I don't know how many people are planning on doing community
there will
outreach.
be more than one person.
I don't know, so it's a big one, but to have a benchmark, so you can come back for the official community plan to see how many part of the youth population that you're going to for each one. And another thing that I was thinking about too is thinking about housing authority model, and I'm just curious as a community member of what that looks like down the pipeline, because this is a whole job of like research and housing this and how often this stuff gets stuck on somebody's desk or the planner's desk. There's not that many.
So just to, we did put in a budget this year, and I think it's out there now. If not, it's already. It might actually.
May 16th is the RFP award is scheduled.
Yeah, for basically a year-long contract to dial in all those things we need to figure out if we're gonna do a housing authority, or is there another model that we wanna be able to manage these units through,
Right.
whether it's a land trust or a partnership with a nonprofit development company, whatever that model. So we have put the money in this year to have that person to basically deliver on sort of how do we deliver this in perpetuity. So that is in the budget this year. We're moving in that direction, and we're just trying to,
Figure out.
I think, obviously there's some real benefits to a housing authority. We want to figure out what the, this administrative cost is going to be and payout, and when that, the return on that is going to be, and really is that the form that we want to use, the best form? Might be. I mean, certainly, there's really successful models like that out there. So
Yeah, totally.
we're trying to do it right.
Yeah, and it's just a comment of like how much that coordination that takes between.
It's a big job.
The need for the middleman between a developer and social services, and to take it off the developer. You can't ask them to manage it for them.
Yeah, councils definitely acknowledges that this is, we need someone dedicated to this to actually achieve results in it. And that's the direction we're going in. Thank you very much. I thought I had Ted and then Susan.
Yeah, and I share the same concerns about having, you can have 30 pop-up events and talk to 3 people, and it's just without that, and having an iPad is very different for people, and being asked questions that we think are relevant is very different than showing up at a place and saying, oh, look at all this, I'm really interested in the environment, I'm gonna go over here, and you could say to somebody, but without the actual, without things in front of you, I'm a visual learner. I like seeing maps. I like knowing, what neighborhood planning is like. If somebody showed up for me with an iPad and said, oh, we have an extremely comprehensive document and I'm gonna ask you questions about it or ask you what your concerns are.
Are pop-up
It's
events
different.
someone showing up with an iPad?
Your
I
iPad.
believe so.
No, I don't think we're going to compel people to sit down and read the document. We'll
No,
have maps,
exactly.
we'll have the executive summary.
So they're actually like a tabled event.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that they're mobile, they're 1 to 2 hours, so we're moving frequently, trying to hear as many possible people as we can. Given that we're trying to get people to deal with something that big, it's really trying to drive people to, here's the document, here's the sections, here's the way that you can feed back to us, because it's not possible to
Yeah.
have people sort of sit and then try and digest 70 pages and feed back to you right there and then. We've got to give people some time to do that. So.
So what I was thinking about is the actual process when we have the big event, is that people are going to come, you may only have, a limited amount of engagement on that one day, but people are going to come away and say, hey, I did this amazing thing, and I actually engaged on the OCP, and there's going to be social media around it as well. So either capitalizing off that to list the 30 mobile, I don't even know what 30 mobile events are listed.
When we know
so
what
they're
they
not
are,
listed.
we will
Okay.
publicize.
Perfect. But then, that's where I think a second event would be amazing, because you could capitalize off of that event and say, there's one more event, as opposed to the small engagement.
Okay, and Gary has articulated that we're going to do a bit of a wait and see what the engagement is, see if we hit the targets in terms of we want to make sure we're engaging this many youth and this many students, and create those targets within both demographics as well as different cultural groups, etc. Okay, so that's the OCP. We still have active development project review. Can we move on to that conversation?
Yeah, I was just gonna say.
And thanks everyone.
Thanks Susan for keeping us on our toes on this and be.
Jesus.
Concerns me, but I don't even know what's going on, except for me.
Yeah.
Get a business.
We are on to, and thank you everyone for that conversation. I think we've been sort of dancing around that conversation for a long time, and we needed to put a fine point on it. Moving on to item 4.3, active development project review.
Thank you, Chair. So again, we've got the active development projects in front of you. There's a number of new applications that have come in since our last meeting. I will just highlight a few. And my apologies, I haven't highlighted them on this spreadsheet, but the first notable one is the file number 2017-35, the second file on the list, and that's a development permit for the teardrop site. And it has quite a bit of commercial space, 17,600 square feet, and quite a bit of residential. It's essentially a building that varies between 2 and 4 stories and has 104 residential units in it. So it's a development permit. At this point, there's no variances attached to it, and it will be coming to council at some point in the future. Then we've got Lizzie Bay. Lizzie Bay is back with a variance application. So the permit has been approved by council. It hasn't been issued because there's a bit of an obstacle, the setback for the frontage. So what's happened is they've come in and applied with a development variance permit application to vary the setback. There's going to be an adjustment to the site plan to increase the setback. So again, it will be coming back.
They're not coming back to the same plan, they've made alterations.
They've made some alterations.
Okay.
Then we've got an OCP and a rezoning application on Centennial Way. And that's a massive application. It's got 247 residential units and 19,000 square feet of office and commercial space built into it. Most of that office commercial space, or all of it actually, is on one site. It's on the site right closer to the river, and the rest of it is all townhouses.
Go ahead.
I think we've given feedback on this one before, they were at community development, and I'm pretty sure council suggested that some transition from the industrial lands into this would be more interesting for us to see. Like the mud rezoning that we're doing at the top of the industrial park, and so have they made any changes, or we're still working with townhomes here?
No, it's pretty much, it's very similar to what the council has seen already.
I still have an open one, but.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a big application, and so it's probably not coming to council in the next few months at least.
On that one?
Take
Ted?
some time to
No,
process.
it's past the one I wanted to talk to you.
Okay, well, you can come back and talk to whatever you want, we'll just go through maybe Jonas's list and just,
And then we've got an application that's the fourth from the bottom, 2017-25. That's on Cleveland Avenue. It's a rezoning. It's for the Pac West site, and it's got 2 6-story buildings on it, 192 units, and some commercial and office space. And that's all I've had in terms of highlighting applications that are coming forward.
Councillor, on those highlighted ones?
Just in the last one,
Okay, go ahead.
and is that, when you say 2 6-story buildings, is there green space in the middle, or lower density in the middle, or more vertical, I guess, or less vertical?
Good question.
Or is it a 6-story wall?
It's broken up into 2 buildings, so there will be some variation, but I believe both buildings are 6 stories.
Changed from the last time I heard about it.
Yeah.
So still a 6-story building.
You gonna share the conversation with the rest of us?
You're just adding 2 and 4 together to get.
That's a good word.
That's why we're not in the finance department.
Well, on that one there, it's probably at least 2 stories all the way through with 2 towers sticking up, or maybe 3 stories all the way through.
That's correct. I'm not overly familiar with that application yet. It's a new
Anyway,
application.
yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing that one. We have one with the environmental setbacks because of habitat, where we need to have a permit area 11. And it, number, 4th, 5th one down. well, 27 to 30. Number 30, and so I'm just curious as to what the setback's going to be relaxed to, or what they're after?
What is 2017-30?
Yeah. Application proposed to construct a single-family home, the property is within 30-meter setback.
That's
So
something
it's
that
a-
I don't know.
You know, I'm just trying to track how much relaxations we have.
It's not a relaxation. It's the
Hardship.
application is located within a riparian area, assessment area, which is 30 meters.
Yeah.
So to build anything inside those 30 meters, you need to go through the riparian areas regulation assessment
Yeah.
and a development permit.
So I'm just curious as to how close to the water this applicant's hoping to get.
Well, the QEP defines where the sensitive area is, and so nothing can go into that area. And often there's mitigation measures that have to be, such as a fence, to separate the development area from the riparian area. But the 30 meter is kind of a blanket assessment area.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that nothing can be built there. It just means that anything needs an assessment.
I'm just
You know,
bringing
you
this
don't.
up for the other councillors' information because the district actually owns land that has a 30-meter setback. And when we look at developing it, we go, oh, we can't go in that 30-meter setback, yet other people do it all the time. So if we're ever looking for affordable housing or anything like that, I just want us to know that we can do what this guy's doing.
We are.
Absolutely. And if
Yeah, we
we're-
are. We're doing it on the Helping Hands rezoning. We're
We're
doing
gonna
it.
reduce the setbacks here?
Well, we're getting a qualified environmental
They're not
professional to do the assessment,
Okay.
just like everybody else.
Okay, and then the next one is Harris Road. 2017, I guess 30.
Yes.
And the next one down, now this is ALR land. And the applicant's looking at bringing ALR land out of the ALR to produce some 5 single-family homes. And I just wondered what staff took away from that meeting that we had 2 weeks ago where we had the food security guy from the province come up and tell us how important it was for us to protect our ALR land.
Absolutely. We'll be bringing this has to come to council for a decision whether it proceeds to the Agricultural Land Commission or not. So council can make a decision, no, it cannot proceed and it
Okay.
stays in the LR, or it can pass it forward to the ALC to consider whether it should stay or not.
Councillor Kent.
Where am I here? Okay, 2017-11, 39660 government subdivision. I saw a sign up there the other day. This is the area we had just, or we are in the process of designated as MUD.
Yes.
So I gather that your note here, development may be subject to future zoning changes as we deference to that.
Yes, so we have a subdivision application in that area, MUD 1. The subdivision could go ahead because the zoning is in place right now to allow for the subdivision. However, when it comes to the building stage, by the time that subdivision is processed and registered, if it is approved, the buildings would have to comply with the zoning of that day in the future. So that's one of the reasons why we advanced the zoning changes, is because of that interest in duplex, single-family residential in that area.
Thank you. Councillor Elliott.
The very first one, is that supposed to be status complete, because the deck is built?
A certain size of the deck does not require a development permit. And so when it goes beyond that, I believe the applicants want to go beyond what is
Okay.
triggered, but they've gone ahead and did a smaller portion of the deck in anticipation of this program.
All right, thanks.
Councillor Shaw.
It was where we're at with Waterfront Landing. Is this new information, or is this what they came forward to with the last community development meeting on Waterfront Landing?
It's on tonight's agenda.
Yes, Waterfront Land is coming in for first reading, or consideration of first reading tonight. It will, there's been some changes since the Community Development Committee meeting. Nothing major, I would have to say.
Anybody else on any of these development applications? Anyone from the audience want to specifically ask about any of these? No, I really appreciate this list every month. Yes,
And on the gateway, how's that process going?
It's,
Thanks for asking about that every
I
single.
always have to bring it up, it's my pet.
it is moving along, however slowly, but it is kind of still in that same area.
Limbo.
Limbo, yes.
Okay.
Great, I don't see any more hands. They're on a status, reports from council, roundtable, any topics of interest in that meeting yet?
Yeah, a discussion around C10 zoning. And I mentioned this some time ago, somebody, but for me, it comes out of the discussion we had about a particular application that we turned down. And my recollection of that meeting is going around the table with the 7 of us, I think there were maybe 5 or 6 different visions of what C10 zoning might be like. And I know the developer phoned me up the next day and said, what do I do? And I had no clue what to tell him. So I don't know how planning feels about it, whether they have some idea of what might or might not be in C10 zoning. But it didn't seem to me from that meeting that we as a council have kind of a common vision for what that zoning might include. And it might take more language, if we could get that common vision, it might take more language in the bylaw to deal with that. So just as a discussion.
We can think about that, look at it. Karen?
One thing I think that I mentioned to several councillors, and I know I've mentioned it to Jonas, is doing a community development meeting on the road to look at our multifamily developments, and before we write the new DP area guidelines, to see what we like about what's been built, or where we've had a fail, possibly, and just so that we can go out and actually walk in some of those. And I don't know how we get around maybe transit, because they're spread apart, but I think it would be useful to actually go and experience some of
No,
them.
it's a good idea. Yeah, we'll add that. Any other thoughts? Don't see anything. Motion to terminate, moved by Karen, seconded by Doug. All those in favor? Opposed, motion carries.